I'm Ken Foster, Executive Director here at YBCA. I want to welcome you to this conversation about community activism. For those of you that are, for whom this is your first time doing this, this is a series of conversations that we are hosting in 6 different areas, areas that people within the Bay Area have demonstrated the kind of creativity and innovation and sort of leadership, national and international leadership around an issue, just like our artists, who are in the very privileged but perhaps awkward situation of being seated in the front here, because we wanted to engage artists in these conversations about these issues that are so vital to our world and in which the Bay Area is such a leader. So we've already had one on futurism, we've had one on food. In a couple weeks we're having one on radical identities, environmentalism, and technology. So all areas within which people in the Bay Area have been real innovators and leaders. And this one in particular, I think I'm very excited about, and also I think for YBCA is a really important one because a lot of the work that we do in all of our programming really looks at social issues and looks at the world that we're living in and has an analysis, a critique, re-examination, and a lot of artists that we do work with are interested in those ideas. So community activism has a long history in the Bay Area, and with each of these topics we said, well, you know, gosh, we could talk for days about community activism in the Bay Area, where should we focus? And in each case what we tried to do is find the people that are doing the work right now and that are really, like our artists, breaking some boundaries and moving us forward in ways that maybe we know about and maybe we don't know about. So rather than looking nostalgically back at the roots of community activism here, where we've got some folks here that are really taking us forward, and really thrilled to have them here. A couple things before we start. First, I want to call out Nick Collin, who is our Community Engagement Associate, who organized this panel. I also want to say that in the line with community activism, we have a performance coming up next weekend by a company from New Zealand. The artistic director is Lemmy Bonifacio. It's an extraordinary piece, and as I was saying earlier to the artists, you know, we're in one of those positions where this is the kind of event that nobody ever heard of it. We're competing friendlily with Paul Taylor and Alvin Ailey. So, like, you know, it's been very hard to get any traction around this. So I thought it would be really good to let you know that this extraordinary artist is coming next week, and Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night. We'll be performing in the theater a piece called Mao. It's pretty unbelievable and very strong, and the kind of thing that you never get a chance to see, and the kind of thing that after they're gone, you'll hear about it and go, damn, why wasn't I there? So don't let that happen. Next Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And there's a brochure out in the lobby there that you can pick up that tells you more about that. So I am thrilled and delighted and honored, actually, for the panel that we have here. And I want to introduce Jeff Chang, who organized the panel, is going to lead this conversation. I've got a few bits about Jeff that I want to tell you about, that he was the organizer of the inaugural National Hip Hop Political Convention, that he's the author of Can't Stop, Won't Stop, which many of you probably know. He's written for The Nation, The New York Times, the San Francisco Chronicle, Vibe, Foreign Policy, Mother Jones. He's got a zillion awards, including American Book Award and the Asian American Literary Award, USA Ford Fellow in Literature, North Star News Prize, and named by the Utne Reader as one of the 50 visionaries who are changing your world. And he covered the 2000 presidential elections for 360 Hip Hop, and most important, in 2007, he interviewed Barack Obama for the cover of Vibe. I know Jeff is a really smart and really active, extraordinary activist, and I think he's put together a great program. So please join me in welcoming Jeff Chang and Community Activism panel.
Or do we need to? Is this on? This is on? Okay. Thanks very much, Ken. Thanks also to the Yerba Buena staff, to Nick, to Joelle, to the crew, to Ren, everybody for bringing us here today. Our conversation, I guess, is going to be on community activism and also trying to think about political movements. And again, as Ken was saying, we were trying to be sort of perspective anybody who's grown up in the Bay Area, as both of you have, knows that folks can dwell a lot on history, both for good reasons and for bad. I mean, in a lot of respects, our discussion today is keyed by futurists that were thinking ahead, half a century ago, longer than that. You can talk about the free speech movement and how that was keyed before that by the anti-McCarthy demonstrations that were occurring around the late 50s. You can talk about multiculturalism, the rise of multiculturalism, and how that in turn was keyed by the rise of third world politics on the campuses, with the Black Panthers in the streets, the IWK, the Chicano movement, the American Indian movement. You can talk about the rise of connectivity and computing, and how that in turn was influenced by the rise of folks who were libertarians, but also very technologically advanced, and that it was both funded by the defense industry and in reaction to the defense industry to a large extent. The military-industrial complex, the rise of all that. So the list can go on, and we can talk a lot about what has happened here, and we do all the time. But we wanted to focus today sort of on what prospectively we're looking at, what political movements look like now. And I think that one of the things that's really interesting about both of the folks that we have here today is that we see sort of two vectors of looking towards the future. Folks that are working on the grassroots level, on a community level, on a very local level, transforming communities in that respect, and folks that are working in the digital realm, on the internet, doing online organizing, and thinking globally, having a lot of play, actually, in recent revolutions that have been occurring around the country. So we have a lot of these really interesting things that we can play with during our time that we can talk together here. In a lot of ways, the outpost here in the Bay Area, the outpost, I called it an outpost because we're sort of thought of by the far right as the antithesis, right, of everything that they're trying to do in terms of where they want to take the country, in terms of trying to restore a nostalgic kind of past, and we're the outpost, the Bay Area outpost, in a sense. We're the antithesis, but when youthful energies kind of come together, they find root here in the Bay. There's a lot of like minds, there's a lot of resources, there's a lot of mentors. And so we're going to try to get into all of that kind of stuff today. Let's see. What I want to try to do now is introduce the two wonderful people here, and I'm so glad that all of you decided to, come and join us this afternoon instead of being at WonderCon, because we do have a lot of superheroes here, right here on stage with me, two of the biggest superheroes in the Bay, and a lot of you in the audience as well. First, to my immediate left is Eva Galperin. She worked in Silicon Valley for years as a system administrator, and then she saw the light. That's how you describe it, right? She went and got degrees in poli-sci and international relations at San Francisco State University, went to work at the U.S.-China Institute, and she's been at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which we'll talk a lot more about, defending free speech, privacy, innovation, consumer rights in the network world. And most recently, she's been an international activist of sorts. She's been taking on issues such as the role of social media and sort of the on-off switch, that kind of stuff, and in what we're calling, I guess, now the Arab Spring, right? What's been happening in Egypt and Tunisia. She's also been working a lot around traderware, around internet security in China, and even some WikiLeaks stuff.
Yes.
We'll get to talk about all that today. So please join me in welcoming Eva Galperin.
Hi there.
To her left is Esperanza Tervalon-Daumont, who is the executive director of Oakland Rising. And it's a multilingual, multiracial collaborative. It's based in the Flatlands in West Oakland and East Oakland. And it includes 4 social justice organizations that are looking to try to create a political infrastructure, to advance progressive influences in the city. She grew up in the town. She's been an SCIU organizer, and in the aftermath of Katrina, she was the administrative director for the People's Organizing Committee in New Orleans. She also worked on the Obama campaign. She's a political director for Barbara Lee. She's a member recently appointed of the Alameda County Human Relations Commission, and she received the prestigious 2010 Redford Center Art of Activism Award. So please join me in welcoming Esperanza.
Thanks, Jeff.
So Esperanza, let's start with you. Let's talk a little bit about Oakland Rising. How did it come about? How do you think what you're doing now in West and East Oakland, and also given the fact that you're coming from a family that's very deeply rooted in the radical politics of the city, how do you think what you're doing now is pushing forward our conceptions of community organizing and political change?
Yeah. So again, my name is Esperanza, and I work with Oakland Rising. And I'm born and raised in Oakland. My parents saw the light in the late 60s and decided that California was where revolution was happening. And my mother and my father was a part of the Young Lords Party in in New York, really moving an independence mission out of Puerto Rico. Decided he wanted to come out and see what was happening in California. My mom moved out to California and thought she would cut off her hair and grow an afro and sit out of Berkeley, where she was accepted with a full scholarship. And started working with the Panthers. And I grew up in a really, I have one older brother, and we grew up in a really closed community. And I say it was kind of like growing up in the mafia because there were never any outsiders ever. Everybody I knew had a parent who was in the Panther Party and was really clear that we needed to figure out how to deal with wealth and the division of labor and all these questions that most people were going tonight to Goodnight Moon, and my parents were reading me volumes of Lenin. So I knew that I was growing up really differently than other people, but wasn't totally clear who those other people were because I was never around them. All of my cousins, we all believe the same thing. And so the one thing that I never, ever, ever wanted to be, right around high school, I'll never forget, I wanted to come home and I was like, Mom, I want these Nikes. They're like dope for breakdance, like this is gonna be awesome. And my mom was like, well, why aren't you gonna buy Nikes? And she was like, where were they made? And I was like, in China. And she was like, mm-hmm. And how much do you think it costs to make them? And I was like, probably $1. She was like, probably 60 cents. She's like, and how much do they cost? And we were like, $50. And she was like, and what is that called? And I was like, imperialism. She was like, and. So that was my life, right? And so I figured out really quickly, like the thing I definitely didn't want to be was an organizer. And so when I came out of college, I realized, oh, the only thing I actually can do is be an organizer. And so I took up this process of going in and figuring out how to transform myself by transforming my community. And really drawing on all of the skills that they had taught me my entire life when I didn't know I was in training, to be able to organize and educate and mobilize and excite people to believe that we have the power and know that we have the power to change our own lives. That said, I came on to Oakland Rising about 3 years ago. Funny story about Oakland Rising, it was actually the brainchild of Van Jones, Amaha Casa, a woman named Vivian Chang, who were all at this retreat of EDs of color. And they were saying, we come together over and over and over to fight like horrible ballot measures that are put up at the statewide level, local ballot measures, local fights. We can come together and we like fight these electoral fights, and then that's it, we walk away, we leave. And then we have to come back, but we've done no real job of engaging people in the electoral process over and over and over. And they said, what we should do? We should create something in Oakland, something about rising, and Van Jones was like, Oakland Rising, like Voltron. So Oakland Rising is like Voltron. It is a collaboration of social justice organizations, Asian Pacific Environmental Network, East Bay Alliance for a Sustainable Economy, or EBASE, the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights, and Just Cause, which is now Calsa Justa Just Cause, which works both here in in San Francisco and in Oakland. And we most recently brought on Mujeres Unidas y Activas, which is a women's feminist organization, base-building organization in Oakland and San Francisco. We run multilingual programs, so we run programs in English, Spanish, Cantonese, and Mandarin 3 times a year, specifically to unlikely and occasional voters in East and West Oakland. Now, I'm going to tell you right now that there's no way that I can tell you this as sexily as the people who at the Redford Center work for Sundance Film. And they were able to make a film about what we do. So if it's cool with y'all, I would love to show you the film to sort of take a look at, poetic look at what my work is about. Yes? Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Do it.
And if you did your homework and already have seen it, I apologize for showing it to you twice. But for those of you who didn't do your homework, do we have sound? No?
You want to narrate?
Oh. I'm going to pull it back for you. There you go. Growing up in Oakland, there were several options for folks like me. You can sell drugs, you can prostitute or pimp, depending on who and what you are, or you can end up dead, end up in the cemetery. And I didn't really want to do any of those. And I knew that I was going to have to do something to help make sure that other families didn't have to do that, other kids didn't have to make those choices. Oakland is the second most diverse city in the nation. The democratic process that has existed previously didn't reach out to people of color and immigrants. And I don't know what the expectation can be for our young people to go on and be productive members of society. The bottom line is that we put more money into prisons than we do into funding California's education system. We have to redefine what the role of government is in our lives. We believe in creating an authentic local democracy, and the biggest part of that is having full participation.
Hi, my name is Steve. My name is Hayden. Hi, my name is Earl Thomas. My name is Precious. I'm calling from Oakland Rising. I'm calling from Oakland Rising on behalf of the California Action Fund.
Our work is to make sure that people are informed, engaged, and educated, and we do the mobilization to make sure that they get to the polls. 2007, there were 204,000 registered voters. Of that, 143,000 of them were unlikely and occasional voters. And of that, about 99,000, just under 100,000, were from low-income immigrant and communities of color. So we know that the majority of folks who are showing up to Oakland polls are whiter, wealthier, more educated voters, but the majority of the votes, the real power of the vote is rooted in low-income communities of color in East and West Oakland and the Flat. People want to participate, right? People want to know what's happening at City Hall. But who has time to know what's happening at City Hall? Like, nobody, because you're busy feeding your kids and making sure that you have your job and making sure you have food in your refrigerator. The most important thing that we can do and have to do is to not see ourselves as separated from, but that we actually have a role to play in our communities.
We talk about what it is that brought people here, right? And what it is that the government can do for you.
Voting is one of those things that is free, and it's fun, and it's sexy. And if we can get folks to really grab onto this notion that they have power in this one act, we can begin to see a sea change. Part of the question is, are we as humanity going to come together and figure out how to create enough for everyone? When I came to Oakland Rising, the thing that we started to talk about immediately was this idea of winning. What does it look like to win? What does it mean for organizations to win? What does democracy look like when it wins? When I'm talking to people about the notion of democracy and really trying to inspire people to participate, we talk about the kind of city we want to see. As a 32-year-old single mom, born and raised in Oakland, to be able to use all of the skills and experiences that I have from growing up here to work on organizing for my own community and to do work that aligns with my real values is super powerful. What we want to see is an Oakland that is available to everyone. So we talk about libraries being open. We talk about parks being clean and the lights being on at night for kids to be able to play. We talk about after-school violence prevention programs and jobs that have health care and benefits. We talk about and paint a picture of what Oakland can look like for families. The people who are most impacted, the poorest people, the darkest people, that those folks should be leading this movement. We know that when we go out and talk to voters in our community and have them fully participate, we could potentially run the entire city. Cats are dope.
That's good, yeah.
Oh.
You can just shut it down.
Cool.
So Esperanza, I actually had a question for you. When your parents began organizing, when they came to Oakland initially in the late 60s, in a lot of ways, you know, it was still very fraught The KKK still marched
Totally.
in large parts of the East Bay.
Yep.
They were still around in Oakland in some areas. Oakland was segregated, still is segregated in a lot of respects. And in a lot of ways, they saw radical organizing as going to people in the streets and getting them organized around particular issues, police brutality, environmental justice, different types of issues. I guess the question I have for you is, voting is episodic. Voting takes place, as you said, there's an election every year.
Mm-hmm.
But voting is, in a large sense, episodic.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see, and you've said here, and I think it's an incredible quote, you're not interested in the struggle, you're interested in winning.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see what you're doing as contributing to ongoing victories, to winning on a daily type of basis in ways that make real change?
Yeah. It's a really interesting concept when you come out of a context that is all about struggle. And I've had a lot of people really pressure me around, like, what do you mean? You don't want to struggle? I grew up struggling, my family struggled to put food on the table. I mean, everything was a struggle. And I really made a conscious decision that I didn't want to live my life like that. I also think it's really important to see that there are lots of strategies and tactics to building the kind of movement that we need to change the world. And I tell my family, which is probably harder than telling you all, I actually think that the work I do is the most centrist work I will ever do. I am not doing work that is creating a revolution. I'm doing reformist work at best. And as a person who is deeply left identified, not politicized in college, but coming out of a left context, I recognize that and feel like what we do and what we are doing is both seeding the political landscape, so doing really long-term sort of issue framing for other people who are doing much more left revolutionary work to sort of come in. I think that there has to be a particular, and the reason my parents were so believed that there was going to be a revolution when they came to California. My family thought there was going to be a revolution. Let me just be unclear with you. And we were like ready. And I can go out into the forest with you and pick all kinds of berries and we can eat. And if you get shot, I can use a tampon. I got all kinds of little tricks for you. You know what I'm saying? But what we knew in that was that there was a particular economic and political context that had to exist for that to happen. And in the 70s and 80s, my family and the people that I was around thought that was going to happen. And when it didn't happen, and the economics and the politics of the United States shifted, it became very clear that we needed to find another way to continue to talk about these ideas, and for the idea that I grew up with, the sort of old school left idea of revolution, to begin to evolve. Because our people and our communities are evolving. They have evolved. And so part of that evolution is figuring out at every opportunity and turn how we can, as organizers, as people who care about low-income, immigrant communities of color, can step in and make change for people right now. And so I got into organizing because I like to win. I liked winning fights for people who were custodians at working the graveyard shift at Caltrans. I liked it. I liked teaching them how to stand up to their boss, and I liked teaching people how to lay down in front of bulldozers in New Orleans, and I liked it. I really enjoyed that idea of how do I define a win and then make it happen. And when I got to the electoral organizing, I really liked the defined beginning, middle, and end, and the process of bringing people through their own political consciousness about what this one really simple, really socially acceptable act is, right? I tell people all the time, we're asking people to go out and vote. We're not asking people to lay down in front of a bulldozer. Those are really different asks. As an organizer, those are really different kinds of asks. But this one act can make sure that we don't have, all of the backlash that we've had, the sort of onslaught against women's rights that we see in California every year. All of the really anti-immigrant, anti-student, right, ballot initiatives that have come up over and over that hurt our communities right now, and how it is that we take a stand. And as an organizer, I love electoral organizing because it's so concrete. You can go into a building with workers, and you have to figure out how many workers are there, and you have to kind of figure out the math problem. This is so easy. There are a certain number of registered voters. 50 plus 1 is winning. They think that this is what the number for 50 plus 1 is. We go out and talk to people that they don't think are going to vote, poor people, brown people, people who don't speak English as a first language, and then we throw off their numbers and we win. This to me was like genius. I was like, oh, this is me. This is me all day. And I think we have to challenge each other around sort of our roles in the movement. This is my role in the movement. I am not saying, and will never say, and have never said, we are going to use electoral reform to get ourselves out of the challenges of capitalism. It's not going to happen. This is a process that we are in. It's an organizing tool that we can use right now while other people who are smarter than me, who are more think tanky than me, who are more whatever, are figuring out that other thing we're going to do. This is my role and this is my contribution. And I'm okay with that, right? At the end of the day, I'm cool with that. So that's been my trajectory.
Okay. Eva, let's talk about your work. You do so many different types of things with the Electronic Frontier Foundation. You guys are right at the front lines in some respects around digital security or internet security with the Arab uprisings, the Arab Spring. You've been doing work around traderware, which you might want to explain what that is. You've been doing work around WikiLeaks and all this type of stuff. So give me a sense of the kinds of spread of things that you do. And what's sort of the animating theory behind that? What brings it all together? How can we sort of understand what it is that your philosophy is to the kind of work that you're committed to doing?
Well, our philosophy is surprisingly simple. For those of you who came in late, my name is Eva Galperin. I am an activist for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and we make sure that when you go online, your rights come with you. That is essentially what it comes down to. We want to make sure that when you go online, your privacy is still protected, your security is still protected, your right to free speech still exists, your right to the freedom to meet and to organize still exists. We do a lot of consumer work where we try to make sure that if you bought it, you own it. This is actually where some of my work in traderware comes in. There has been a lot of very interesting movement in the area of intellectual property around the idea that when you buy a piece of software or a device, you are merely leasing it from the people who have sold it to you, and they can go back and change it any way that they want. And furthermore, if you go and you mess with it, if, say, you're a hardware hacker or you don't like the way that your device is set up, that they can sue you or that they can cause the device to break or turn itself off. And we find that patently ridiculous. We also do a lot of work in government transparency and accountability, both the US government and governments abroad. I don't know if any of you have heard of the NSA case. Back in 2006, the EFF sued AT&T and later the NSA and the US government over its warrantless wiretapping program, which the case originated from some documents that we got from an AT&T building on Folsom Street, just down the street, where the NSA had installed a secret room with a piece of equipment manufactured by a local company called Neris, which pulled all of the information that was going through this room about your phone calls, about your internet activity, copied it, and sent it to the NSA for analysis, both domestic and international calls. And our lawsuit against the government is ongoing because it turns out that if you start a lawsuit in 2006 against the US government, it will still be going in 2011. And so really the animating force behind our ideas is that your rights don't disappear just because you're online. And that matters if you're in the United States, where the law in many ways protects your right to freedom of expression and your right to privacy and your right to organize. And in places like Egypt and Tunisia and Syria and Iran, where there is not necessarily a rule of law, but we believe that those basic human rights still exist, and we go through a lot of effort to make sure that they're protected. Now, the EFF is divided into three.
Can you talk a little bit? I want you to brag a little bit here, though. Talk a little bit about what you did around Egypt and Tunisia,
all right.
For instance.
Well, the Arab Spring really began in Tunisia in the middle of winter. And it started with a series of protests that ran all through December and January, and really exploded around January 25th. And around the time that the protests really intensified in Tunisia, the Tunisian government, which controlled the single ISP, which was running in Tunisia and gave everyone their internet access, set up a JavaScript injection attack against certain websites. They created a fake page that people who were going to either Facebook or Yahoo or Gmail would encounter when it came time to log in to their email or their Facebook account. And it included a little script which would pull their login information, send it to the Tunisian government, and the Tunisian government would then turn around, log into these accounts. We are fairly certain that they would also pull down all of the information for use in future reprisals, and then they erased those accounts. So if you were a Tunisian activist in January of this year, and you, say, logged into Gmail, the Tunisian government had your login information, and it's possible that one day that you would try to log into Gmail only to discover that your account was closed and that the Tunisian government had all of your personal information. So that was a very scary situation. As it turns out, for technical reasons, because this was a JavaScript injection attack, it was really easy to get around. All you had to use was, you had to log in using HTTPS, which is a secure form of sending your information over the web instead of straight HTTP. So the first thing that we did was we contacted Facebook and Google and Yahoo. We said, hey, this extremely dangerous thing is happening to your Tunisian users. Perhaps you might want to turn on HTTPS by default in order to protect your users. And in some cases, that's what they did, though we feel that they really should have done that faster. We would have appreciated that, and I'm fairly certain that their Tunisian customers would have appreciated that as well. So after that, we then went on to educate Tunisian activists and protesters about ways in which they could get the word out while remaining safe, because we knew that the government was actively antagonistic towards their goals. And so we encouraged people to use Tor in order to browse the web anonymously. Tor stands for the onion router, or also Tor is the German word for gate. And it allows you to browse anonymously so that when people look for your IP address, they get some completely different IP address. They can't figure out who you are. We encouraged people to use HTTPS in order to encrypt their data so that the government couldn't intercept it. And generally, we warned people to be careful because we were really worried about the possibility of reprisals. Such as what happened in Iran. In fact, during the last weeks of the Tunisian revolution, the Iranian government executed by hanging four activists who had been active in the Green movement the year before. And their crime was having taken some pictures with their cell phones of the anti-government protests in Iran and posted them online. That was all that they did. And the final thing that we did during the Tunisian revolution was we tried to get some of the pictures and video that were coming from the protests online to places where people in Tunisia could see them, so that they could share information more efficiently. The Tunisian government was going through a lot of trouble to turn off HTTPS and to block access to video sharing sites, because sharing that video gave people more knowledge and more power and made them outraged and brought them out into the streets. And the Tunisian government was very afraid of that. So we worked to help protesters circumvent that. And then we did a lot of very similar stuff in Egypt, helping Egyptians to protect themselves, and we continue to do that with all kinds of protesters in North Africa and the Middle East right now.
So on the one hand, EFF is really interested in pushing back sort of government overreach into people's ability to be able to communicate with each other on a very, very basic type of level, which in a lot of respects allows then for rebellions, revolutions to begin to grow, I suppose, yeah? And the other part of it sounds like EFF is very interested in preventing corporate overreach into people's privacy, and in that sense protect their rights, not just as consumers, but really as citizens, as netizens, I suppose.
Yeah, a lot of the problems aren't simply governments. There are plenty of places where the government does not own ISPs, and when that happens, they still manage to put pressure on companies in order to breach your privacy or your security. We call this the problem of weak internet intermediaries. I don't know if any of you remember that when Julian Assange and WikiLeaks leaked the American diplomatic cables, one of the very first things that happened was that Amazon took away his hosting in the cloud. They said, we're not going to host this stuff. Then PayPal said, we're not going to process payments to your organization. Visa did the same thing. MasterCard did the same thing. And they all did it as a result of pressure from the government. Not always direct pressure. In the case of Amazon, they got a call from Senator Lieberman that said, well, I see you're hosting these cables. Your life could suddenly get very difficult if you keep hosting these cables, and that's really all I'm going to say about that. Bye now. And suddenly, Julian Assange couldn't find any place that would host his cables. He couldn't find any place that would host his domain. It was especially hard to get to wikileaks.org for a while. Other organizations that had wanted to take WikiLeaks down, in fact, had sued in order to have the domain taken away from him. So there are many ways to silence speech by going after the intermediaries. And that's something that EFF fights back on very, very hard because, again, your rights your rights don't disappear the moment you go online, but the law hasn't necessarily caught up with that. And there are still many technical ways in order to that you can use in order to silence your speech when you're depending on people who aren't necessarily going to stand up for you.
Last question, and then I want to sort of bring both of you into this. What do you think it is about the Bay Area that's allowed an organization like EFF to be started here? What's sort of the idea, what are sort of the ideas, ideological sort of underpinnings that you think fed into an organization such as EFF that does all these different types of things?
Well, what's really interesting about EFF is that it wasn't started in San Francisco.
Okay.
EFF originally sprung out of this case called Steve Jackson Games versus the Secret Service, which started in Austin in 1990. Then the organization moved to Washington, D.C., where we were very focused on lobbying. And the whole Washington, D.C. political culture very nearly tore EFF apart. And in the late 90s, they made the decision that EFF was going to move to San Francisco, which it did. And that has been an incredibly fertile ground for us in our organizing, and it really helped us to reconnect with our civil liberties roots and also with our tech roots. We started to understand that lobbying the government is not enough, and that's not where our people were, and that was not where we needed to be. We needed to be in the place where people were innovating and thinking about how they were going to shape the future hands-on instead of just through legislation.
Shift gears a little bit. I want to ask both of you, how do you think we're here to talk about community activism. How do you think our definitions of the word community have changed in the last 10 years or so, 20 years, 30 years? And how does it affect and impact now how we think about organizing community, how we think about fostering activism in community?
Well, community is so much bigger than it used to be. It used to be that your community were your immediate family, or your extended family, or the people who lived on your block, or the people who lived in your neighborhood, or even in your city, or in your area. But the internet really brought on the advent of the long tail, which is that everyone has their sort of niche interests, And if you have a niche interest, there's a chance that there's no one in your house who shares that interest. There's no one on your block. There's no one in your neighborhood. There are maybe 1 or 2 people in your town, maybe a dozen people in your city or in your area. But if you post something online, you're going to find thousands of people who share your interests, and suddenly you have a community. I was talking to Jeff earlier, and I used the example of WonderCon, which is the science fiction convention, which is happening down the street. It used to be that the people who were interested in science fiction and comic books and fantasy was, that one guy, sketching comics at the back of the classroom when he's supposed to be taking notes. And now it's thousands of people taking up our precious parking spaces. Going to a convention, and they have this tremendous sense of community together. And by being able to meet one another and talk to one another and to act in concert, they have a tremendous impact on the entertainment industry. It used to be that science fiction conventions were very small affairs that took place in like hotel ballrooms, and there was almost nobody there, and everyone kind of didn't make eye contact. And now Hollywood comes out to these things. They screen trailers for their movies. They understand that this is a very active, engaged audience that can work for them. And I think that if we can do for digital civil liberties and politics and voting what the internet has done for comic and science fiction geeks, that we could be tremendously successful.
That's right. I would just chime in. I mean, I think that it's really, my work is so different. My work still happens on the doors, in people's neighborhoods, in language. And I think that what it means to be in community in the Bay Area especially is that people are allowed to be full human beings, right? So a lot of people will come from this and then go to your farmer's market and then go to your friend's house for vodka later. Like, we can do all of those things and be very much a part of lots of communities, and those communities can intersect. Maybe 2 of you are gonna go from here to the farmer's market to drinking vodka. So there are lots of opportunities to build and connect around community. I would say that a lot of our traditional communities still do exist, and I think that lots of us are trying to foster and recreate that feeling of a neighborhood. I mean, I know in Oakland, I know everybody on my block, but we don't talk to each other, or we don't whatever, and so really trying to recreate on the human level. And then I think just in terms of the social justice movement stuff, we have all of these different places where people are creating communities, and we're consciously bringing them together. So I see one of my favorite artists, Fabiana, right here, who is a social justice activist and artist. And her work sort of, along with other folks like Melanie Cervantes and other folks, they're really pinpointing and creating arts that represent what is happening in our work right now on the ground. And they're coming to engage in conversations about electoral organizing, about base building, about environmental justice questions, about food justice, right? And so our social justice movement is really thick and vibrant and dynamic. And I think that is part of what makes living in the Bay Area specifically so beautiful. I know a lot of people who come from the Midwest. The Midwest is my new kind of target area for people who are coming to Oakland. People coming from the Midwest sort of have a slice of life, or a couple slices of life. I feel like Oakland and the Bay Area is this humongous buffet. And that community is like when you get all of those different foods and throw them on your plate and have a party. So I feel like there's a lot of opportunity for us to continue to create community and to learn from the different slices.
Let me ask you this. I mean, it seems like in some ways both of you are talking you're starting from identity, right? You're talking about sci-fi geeks, talking about vodka drinkers, people that are sort of, you might think of this as sort of what your identity is, or you identify with that. But I guess the question I have is about community. How do you get people out of the senses of their identities, into a larger sense of community, and where are you moving that community? The internet, in so many respects, is, and this is an old sort of, hash. So I'm going to throw it out there, and I want you to take it as far away as you can, as quickly as possible. But the internet, long tail, and all that kind of stuff is about the 25 people that can do that over here in the long tail. And you're talking about communities that are in still some ways very segregated, right? You're talking about Southeast Asians that live in the fruit belt that may never talk to their Latino neighbors. So how do you in your work conceive of how you take identity, move that to community?
Well, in some ways, the best way to forge a community out of sort of a clump of people with similar identities is to show them what the threats to that identity and community are. A lot of what EFF does, especially in pointing out the problems of weak internet intermediaries and privacy and security, is showing people that a lot of what they take for granted in terms of communication can be taken away from them, and that they need to act to protect it. And if privacy and security are only for a certain few technologically savvy people who know how to employ the right tools, then really you don't have privacy or security at all. All that you've done is ghettoized and fetishized this basic human right, and I find that appalling. One of the things that we're really trying to do is try to make everybody who does anything online understand that they are part of a community, and that community is fragile, and that it can be threatened. A lot of people were really surprised when Mubarak, just a few months ago, managed to turn off the internet in all of Egypt for 5 days. Imagine, if you will, that you wake up tomorrow and the internet is off. Imagine if you're in the middle of a revolution and all you're doing is you're trying to get the word out about what's going on this street, or whether the soldiers are moving in over the bridge and your internet is off. That is not a small thing, and it's really helped to mobilize people and to help them understand exactly what the problems are. And part of what EFF does is we try to present solutions. For example, Tor for anonymous browsing, and HTTPS everywhere for secure web browsing, and also more cutting-edge projects such as mesh networking for your cell phones, which will allow you to get online even when your government has turned the internet off. And pressure on internet intermediaries to have them stand up to the government when the government shows up and says, hey, ISP, turn your internet off, I'm the government. So there's a lot of work to do, but the community is already there. It's really just all about waking people up and making them realize that they are a community and that they need to act to protect those rights.
From the work that has happened in third world movements particularly, really acknowledging that those places that have really been able to change and transform their societies did it with a sense of love and a vision for something else. So continuing to talk about, sort of use that old frame that's like, they're after us, they're gonna get us, doesn't actually motivate particularly low-income immigrant communities of color. But being able to engage in a conversation about what we want our city to look like, what does it mean for us to live here, what does it mean for us to participate, that is actually more engaging and interesting to folks, and that we are able to build just a more proactive community in that way, especially in our work, right, where we're going out and talking to people about what's on the ballot. But I think it translates to sort of the new, all of the movements. We're talking about the green economy, and you can see there's sort of a frame shift, right, the messaging shift. It used to be like, turn off your water, every drop counts, to like, can you imagine a beautiful world where water is plentiful? And so trying to move frames to get people to not live in so much fear. I think that in this country we live in so much fear, and really trying to begin to shift that, and that's part of building a community that's really, really rooted in love. And I think that kind of community is just so much stronger, and you feel good, right? You feel good about being in a community that's like that.
I have a couple more questions, and then what we're going to do is take a little break. And then, as you notice, we've got an open seat here. For the second half of this conversation, we're going to allow that seat to be occupied by any of you that want to come up, add what you might want to say to the conversation, kick the conversation in a different direction, that kind of thing, and then vacate that seat and let the next person come on up and do that as well. We also have mics here. If all you need to do is ask a question rather than sort of come up and want to be a catalyst and that kind of thing. But that's what we're going to be doing after our break. But I have a couple more questions here. One of the really interesting dynamics that's kind of going on here is the push and pull between local and global, between digital and door knocking in a way. And there was there's an article that came out last year by Malcolm Gladwell, who I'm not a fan, but we're going to use this as a way to, I'm sure he's a wonderful guy, I'm just not a fan. He did an article in which he sort of juxtaposed sort of new social media organizing, this is his frame, as opposed to sort of old school traditional organizing. He used the example of the Greensboro boycott, restaurant boycott, and said that this is an example of very high risk, very strong tie, to use some network theory terms, strong tie organizing that caused real change. Whereas social media might be good for getting somebody bone marrow or helping somebody find and get their cell phone recovered. But this was really low risk and weak tie type of organizing. And that in that respect, it was really nothing. And I'm really curious, you know, we were talking earlier, we were talking about the manifestation of the digital divide that's still going on a lot in the flatlines. We were talking as well, too, about, you know, the question of, you know, who are the folks that are the actual activists that are online, even in these Arab countries and that kind of thing. So I'm really interested to see how you all kind of deal with this. Is Malcolm Gladwell posing a really interesting dichotomy, or is he just way off base like I think he is? So tell me what you all think on this.
I think that
there's a lot of ways we can go with this, but go ahead.
Gladwell has set up a straw man. This whole notion that anything you do online by virtue of being online is low risk is, if you will please pardon my strong language, bullshit.
And he obviously missed Egypt. Like, he missed that whole Tunisia. He missed all that.
He missed tell that to the 4 people who were killed in Iran for having posted video of a protest. That was not low risk behavior. Furthermore, all the work that EFF does in order to make sure that activists are safe and protecting themselves and communicating securely is all based on the premise that there are risks. And in fact, the risks are even greater than most people who are communicating online with sensitive information are aware of. And we're trying to give them the tools that they need in order to protect themselves. So I think that Malcolm Gladwell's premise is way off. This is some risky communication. This is risky behavior. And when people take risks, they create strong ties.
That's right.
But are there limits? I mean, one of the things you were saying upstairs, we were talking about this, and you said, and this was in relationship to Yemen and Bahrain. You said, and this is really interesting, when the bullets start flying and the packets stop flying, we don't really have a role anymore.
It's true. EFF is made up of superheroes, but we have not found a way to stop bullets. And it is deeply upsetting. All that we can really do is try to help people communicate safely and effectively, and to call out government intervention or government sometimes propaganda. Or attempts to stop that communication through turning off the internet or intimidating people by taking their logins or turning off encryption, such as turning off HTTPS. But there is absolutely nothing we can do to stop governments from killing people. I wish I had an answer, but that is beyond my pay grade.
I think there's also, right, like some truth to the fact that communities of color where I live and where I'm from don't have the same access to technology. So there are ways that technology can't be used. I was making the joke earlier, it's actually not a joke. There's also this piece where for our work in electoral organizing, we're using cutting edge technology. We use auto dialers, predictive dialers. I mean, we're calling thousands of voters in Oakland and talking to 17,000 people in a 4-week cycle. I mean, we are maximizing every technology available. So we're doing Facebook organizing, we're on Twitter, we've got all of that going. But at the end of the day, our organization had to wait 6 weeks to get a T1 line installed because we weren't T1 line ready in Fruitvale. Like, I'm not like talking about I live in like some, portion of Oakland that's like inaccessible. I'm right there by the Fruitvale BART and we can't get a T1 line. And not like couldn't get one, like had to get 3 different contractors to come in and build us one. They're like, we're gonna run one in the street. We're like, you're gonna run a line in the street. And that's just real, right? And who lives right there by the Fruitvale BART? Southeast Asian, Latinos, and Black families. That's who lives there, right? And a lot of cool, hip people from San Francisco, we love you, who are coming over because the Fruitvale is so great and has great tacos. But that's not who lives there, right? And the infrastructure isn't set up for those folks. It's for the folks who have been there, and there isn't much. And then the other piece, too, is, you know, we were talking about earlier, how do you use social media to talk to voters? Well, we don't, because a lot of folks, like my neighborhood where I'm from, a little deeper in East Oakland, they don't have high-speed internet, so you can still get a dial-up tone. It was so funny. Hulu last night, as their April 1st joke, had like the dial-up connection sound, and like it was making the like the calling, and I was like, oh, that's really clowning, because that's what you hear at my mom's house when I use her. Like, that's not actually that long ago. I was just there 2 days ago. And so, you know, so it's just like there's that real, right? There's what we call, you call it technological divide, we call it the technological racism, right? Like, what's that about? Why is it that we can't have that in my community where we're from? But there is a good piece that we like to go back to the love with, which is that it's amazing because it allows us to continue to have to do our work face to face, talking to and looking at the people in our community. Like, we have to engage with them directly because there's really no other way around it. And at the end of the day, we believe that it's people, whether you're on your computer or you're in your community, it's people who are going to change the world. And so having that opportunity to connect with someone face to face is powerful, both for the folks who do the work and for the people who are being engaged.
So the obvious follow-up question is, you know, the grassroots, netroots. I mean, is there a convergence? Is there a place that hits a sweet spot for the kind of work that you're doing and for the kind of work that you're doing?
You know, I think that there is. I think that for us, like, that's, for our kind of organizing, like, that's the next level. That's what everybody who's doing grassroots organizing, all of us are trying to figure out, like, how do we engage with this machine? As our cities are changing, as Oakland is becoming the most diverse city in the world, we have equal populations of everyone, and we have an opportunity to build these multi-ethnic, multi-racial, multilingual collaborations and communities. Like, what role does the internet play in that? How do we make sure that the internet doesn't replace human interaction and connection? Because that is just so vital to being a human being. But what is the role that we can use this as a tool, like all the rest of the tools are for organizing? Like phone banking is a tool, like door knocking is a tool, like having a meeting is a tool. Like, how do we use it to really advance and move our work forward? I think the Netroots Nation is a prime example. I mean, I think for electoral organizing, look at the Obama campaign, it's like a no-brainer. And I think for our day-to-day work, you know, our auto dialer, our predictive dialers, and moving forward, sort of handheld Palm Pilots that have applications on it where people can download the results while they're walking so that we don't have to have an extra person who's scanning results into a machine to do our report. So we think that there is a convergence. We think the technology is getting smarter. The real question for us is, will it be affordable? Is it affordable to low-income immigrant communities of color, and how does it work in language? Because the biggest challenge that we have always with the internet is converting it to Chinese. It just doesn't, you know, we'd run our program in English, Spanish, Cantonese, and Mandarin. We'd like to expand to Vietnamese, but getting everything in language on a 6-week notice is really tough. So we think that the internet has some racial justice questions to answer, and we're excited to be having those conversations too.
Well, I think that Esperanza has very nearly touched on the point where I think grassroots and netroots intersect. I think everybody knows the answer to this, and they have one in their pocket. It's at the cell phone. And one of the biggest changes that has happened to the internet in the last 10 years is not just the availability of the internet, but the availability of cell phone access and the ability to use the internet on your cell phone. If you go abroad, you will find that there's a very large proportion of people who they don't have broadband access in their house. They don't have dial-up access in their house. They don't have money for a computer. That requires a stable place where you live, level of infrastructure that's not always available, and enough money for a single-use object, which is going to sit there in your house. And not everybody has that, but almost everyone has a cell phone. Almost everybody has a cell phone, and frequently those cell phones are smartphones which can get online, or there are online applications which you can interact with using SMS and text messaging. And I believe that that is the future. And I point that my primary reason for thinking this is having followed the protests in Egypt and Tunisia very closely, where there is an enormous amount of cell phone use. One of the reasons why we knew and cared so much about the protests in North Africa were that the protesters were standing there and they were recording exactly what was going on as it was happening. And they were putting those videos up online on YouTube and Vimeo. They were tweeting live from the protest. In Tunisia, you could follow the Jan25, January 25th hashtag, and you could have just a live stream telling you exactly what's going on in Tunisia and then later in Egypt. And as a counter to that, if you look at protests in, say, Yemen, where there isn't nearly as much cell phone use or smartphone use, there wasn't nearly as much coverage because we had to depend on the mainstream media to get there and to tell us what was going on. You couldn't get that moment-to-moment coverage. And I think that that sort of technology isn't just for the developing world. That technology is for here. It's for people who live in the United States and people who don't necessarily live in places that have the infrastructure to get them broadband and who don't have the spare money to spend on a computer, but everybody needs a phone.
One last question before we go to break. And for me, this is sort of, in some ways, the money question, because it's a thing that I'm sort of concerned about all the time, or at least for the last year or so. And I'm sure it's going to resonate with a lot of folks in the audience who are artists, full-time, work at being artists all the time. And you know, in sort of prepping for this, I went through the Malcolm Gladwell article, and you said, no, you should read Evgeny Morozov. And so I went to Evgeny Morozov, amazing thinker who is, in a lot of respects, kind of the counter-bard to a lot of the sort of techno-optimism. And one of the things that he says is, and this is, I think, wholly in line with what EFF is doing, is that the internet doesn't just give us a chance for us to express ourselves. It can also be used as a tool of repression. And the way that he relates that back, and I think it's metaphorical for the kind of work that you're doing, Esperanza, but you'll recognize where I'm going with this. He has one slide where he says, well, on the one hand, you have cyber activism, but on the other hand, you have cyber hedonism. And if you look at a survey that they did of China, you compare China to the US, and they ask people, you know, does the internet make it more possible for you to have a better sex life? And 3 times as many people in China said yes than in the US, which is really interesting.
It
right?
makes me wonder about that Chinese porn.
Well, but it's a very interesting, it points to the use of the internet under repressive regimes to foster cyber hedonism, or just hedonism in general. So given this, right, given all of this kind of stuff that's kind of going on, I'm sure this question is getting a little bit too big. So let me try to reel it in now. The question is about what's the role of culture and art, artistry, culture workers in creating progressive change, when in some ways the biggest enemy is not necessarily the government or corporations, but ourselves.
Well, allow me to rephrase the question.
Please do, please do.
Because I wouldn't go so far as to dismiss the government or corporations as something that you need to be very careful about and to act against. And in fact, that's central to a lot of the themes which Evgeny Morozov brings up in the internet delusion. He points out that the internet is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it brings all kinds of people together, and they know that they're not alone, and they can come out and they can organize, and you can find that one other person who's interested in that one other obscure thing that you're doing, and that's really great. But on the other hand, oppressive regimes also can use the internet, and they can use it to spy on you. They can use it to carry out reprisals based on the things that you do online, because you're putting a lot of yourself out there. Morozov has been a very vocal person sort of pointing out that this irrational exuberance over how the internet is going to save us all is kind of ridiculous. The internet is a tool. You can use it for good things, you can use it for bad things. And characterizing it as good or bad is like characterizing your hammer as good or bad. It can just, there are just different uses for it. I think that the role of culture on the internet is really to, not just to bring all of this information to people that they never had the opportunity to see before, but to give them some idea of what they should do with it. What do you do next? It's not enough to put out, you know, a picture of the protest or a picture of police brutality. Next, some editorializing, please. Let us know what we should do about that, rather than just sort of retweeting it to all of our friends. What do we do with the sense of outrage over what's going on in the world, or that warm, fuzzy feeling that you get from knowing that you're not alone and that you're part of a community? Now that you're part of a community, what do you do? How do you win? How do you mobilize? And that's what I think that culture and art have the power to do online.
It's really fascinating because I come out of a really artistic home. My brother is in music, and all, you know, art was such a part of the movement in the 70s and the 80s. Like, you know, I still have a screen print that my parents put on corkboard, bless their little hearts, you know, of Lolita Lebrón, when, you know, that says, Viva Puerto Rico Libre. And I just saw a reprint, and I was like, oh, that print is white. Mine's all yellow and like super old, and I just had no idea. But I think that for those of us who sort of live in this place where we're really straddling many worlds, and we're trying to create a different world, and we're part of a social justice movement, art becomes some of the most identifying markers for our culture. So I know that when I look around at the art that my friends are buying right now in Oakland, all of it, quite frankly, all the folks that I work with at Oakland Rising are buying local Oakland art. We want to see images that people are making right there in Oakland of, you know, I think my girlfriend, my coworker and friend Jessamine just bought 2 Scott LaRockwell photographs, and they're, you know, of a bike wheel and of a lowrider wheel, you know, and like that's Oakland right now. And I got one of like the sticker that says, or the tear off of a tattoo that says Oakland, right? Like this is our moment right now. Fabiana just put up some amazing murals in Oakland through the Mitchell K. Poore Foundation, and that art is like on Broadway. We were super fortunate. Oakland Rising was blessed and honored to have her make a piece for us, and so, you know, we have literally, my posse is on Broadway, and it's marking this page for us in our work and in our community. And so I guess my call to artists is to continue to be as creative and as outraged or loving as you can be, and to really mark these moments in our culture, to pick up the issues that are happening in the day and the stuff that because I think the stuff that we feel internally as human beings and as artists is the same stuff that's being projected on the outside. And I think that for those of you who are creative enough to be able to transform that energy and feeling into something that people can see or feel or touch or smell or listen to is an amazing, amazing contribution to society. And I think that this is the kind of community that we all want to live in, and just thank you and honor you for the work that you are putting out into the world.
I could ask you all questions all afternoon, but right now we just want to sort of take a break. There's a bar back there. I don't know if there's any alcohol, but there is? There is. Oh,
there's not vodka.
Oh, there is. So please take advantage of the bar. What we're going to try to do here is reconvene at, I think, 2:30. We've got this seat here. I think we're going to start off with Dave Cook, Davey D. And this seat is going to be rotating. If you want to come up, become part of the panel, offer your thoughts, expertise, and that kind of thing, that would be great. We also have these 2 microphones as well to capture questions if you just have questions and that kind of thing. But thank you very much, and please come back in 15 minutes.